A first-class cabin 30,000 feet in the air. It's a world of quiet luxury and unspoken rules. But on Stellara Air Flight 72, those rules are about to be shattered when a senior flight attendant, Jessica, decides to publicly humiliate a young black woman over her choice of handbag. She thinks she's just putting someone in their place. What she doesn't know is that the woman she's targeting is one of the most powerful entrepreneurs in the country. And the quiet, unassuming man sitting beside her, the man Jessica has ignored completely. He doesn't just work for the airline. He owns it. Stay with us as we expose the full shocking story of how a single act of arrogance triggered a corporate meltdown and delivered a dose of karma so severe it became a legend in the aviation world. The air in the first-class cabin of Stellara Air's flagship A380 was a carefully curated blend of recycled oxygen and expensive perfume. It was a space designed to insulate its occupants from the mundane realities of the world below a gilded cage of plush leather polished chrome and endless champagne. For Imani Williams, it was simply a means to an end, a 9-hour flight from New York to London to finalize the most significant acquisition of her career. At 29, Imani had already built a formidable reputation. Her tech company, Innovate, had revolutionized the sustainable materials industry. She was sharp, tenacious, and carried an aura of quiet confidence that often unsettled those who expected bombast from the successful. She was dressed for comfort, not for show, a simple but elegant cashmere travel set in a soft charcoal grey. Her hair was styled in intricate goddess braids adorned with delicate gold cuffs. The only item that screamed luxury was the bag resting at her feet. It was a bespoke creation, a one-of-a-kind piece from a new black-owned designer in Paris named Elias Dubois. Crafted from a revolutionary plant-based leather her own company had developed, its deep emerald green was the color of old money and new ideas. The hardware was brushed bronze, shaped subtly like the leaves of a ginkgo tree. It was a gift from her husband, and more than its monetary value, it held a deep personal significance. It was a symbol of her journey. The flight attendant assigned to her pod was a woman named Jessica Davies. Jessica was in her late 40s with blonde hair pulled back into a severe, immaculate bun. Her face was a mask of professional pleasantness, but her eyes did all the talking. They were quick to judge, constantly scanning, categorizing, and dismissing. She had been with Stellara Air for over 20 years, climbing her way to the coveted role of first-class cabin supervisor. She saw herself not as service staff, but as a gatekeeper to this exclusive world. From the moment Imani boarded, Jessica's eyes had snagged on her. She saw a young woman casually dressed who seemed out of place among the pinstriped suits and old money pearls. She saw the braids, the relaxed posture, and made a series of swift, silent calculations that all added up to one erroneous conclusion. She doesn't belong here. Her husband, Bruno Croft, settled into the seat across the aisle. To any casual observer, he was utterly unremarkable. Dressed in a simple pair of dark jeans, a grey Henley, and a well-worn leather jacket, he looked more like a musician or a graphic designer than a passenger in a $15,000 seat. He had a book in his hands, his head already down a deliberate wall of anonymity built around him. This was his ritual on these flights. He was not Bruno Croft, the CEO. He was just a man flying with his wife. It was his only chance to observe his airline from the customer's perspective, raw and unfiltered. The service began. Jessica moved through the cabin with a practiced, almost theatrical grace. She addressed a hedge fund manager named Mr. Sterling. By name, inquired about a senator's wife's recent trip to the Hamptons, and laughed delicately at a film producer's stale joke. When she reached Imani, her demeanor shifted. The warmth cooled by several degrees. "Can I get you a drink before takeoff?" she asked, her tone flat, her eyes flicking dismissively from Imani to the emerald bag at her feet. "I'll have a sparkling water with lime." "Please, Imani," replied her voice, calm and even. Jessica nodded curtly. As she turned away, her gaze lingered on the bag again. A faint, almost imperceptible sneer touched her lips. Bruno, watching from over the top of his book, felt a familiar knot of tension tighten in his stomach. He knew that look. He had seen it before, directed at others, and he had fought for years to purge the culture that fostered it. Clearly, the disease was more persistent than he'd realized. The initial slight was small, a microaggression so subtle that most would have missed it, but it was just the overture. As the plane taxied to the runway, Jessica returned with the drinks. She placed Mr. Sterling's scotch on a crisp linen coaster. She served the senator's wife's champagne with a flourish. When she got to Imani, she simply placed the glass of water on the console, the condensation immediately forming a wet ring on the polished wood. No coaster. It was a petty, deliberate omission, an act of trivial disrespect designed to establish a pecking order. Imani noticed. She looked at the ring of water, then up at Jessica. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that moment, Imani understood this was not an oversight. It was a message, and Jessica's cold, challenging stare confirmed it. Imani said nothing. She simply took a napkin from the dispenser and placed it under the glass. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of a reaction. She was here to close a deal that would change her life, and she would not be derailed by the petty prejudices of a flight attendant. Across the aisle, Bruno's jaw was tight. He saw the whole exchange. His anonymity was a double-edged sword. It allowed him to see the truth of his airline, but it also forced him to watch silently as his own wife was subjected to the very behavior he abhorred. He knew that intervening now would shatter his cover and turn the situation into a spectacle. He decided to wait to observe, to gather the data. Jessica Davies had no idea that her every move was now being recorded in the mind of the man who signed her paychecks. The flight had only just begun, but for Jessica, her career was already in a steep and irreversible descent. As the A380 leveled out at cruising altitude, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin settled into a quiet hum of activity. Laptops emerged, papers were shuffled, and the clinking of cutlery on fine china began to echo through the pods. For most, it was an office in the sky. For Imani, it was becoming a stage for a one-woman play of escalating condescension with Jessica Davies as the star performer. The first major confrontation, as it so often does, centered around the object of Jessica's scorn, the emerald green bag. Imani had placed it on the empty seat beside her, within her private suite, wanting to keep it close. It contained not just her personal items, but also the final hard copies of the acquisition agreement and a prototype of a new biofabric that was the centerpiece of the deal. Jessica swept by her eyes, zeroing in on the bag. "Ma'am," she said, her voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear, "you can't leave that there. It needs to be stowed in the overhead compartment." "It's fine where it is," Imani replied politely. "It's not in the way, and I'd prefer to have it with me." A flash of irritation crossed Jessica's face. She thrived on compliance. "It is airline policy, ma'am. For takeoff and landing, all large bags must be stowed. Now that we are in the air, you can keep it at your feet, but not on the seat." "It's a handbag," Imani stated, her calm beginning to fray at the edges. She gestured to the senator's wife across the way, who had a Louis Vuitton tote of a similar size, sitting on her adjacent seat. Her bag is on the seat. Jessica's smile was thin and sharp as a razor blade. Mrs. Davenport is a member of our exclusive chairman's circle. We extend certain courtesies to our most valued flyers. The implication was clear. You are not one of them. The conversation had now drawn the attention of the other passengers. Mr. Sterling lowered his copy of the Wall Street Journal. The film producer paused his movie. They were watching their faces a mixture of curiosity and mild amusement. Imani felt a hot flush of anger and humiliation creep up her neck. This was no longer about a bag. It was a public power play. It's not just a handbag, Imani said, her voice dropping to a low, firm register. It contains sensitive documents and materials for a meeting I have as soon as we land. I need access to them during the flight. It will remain here. Jessica seemed to relish the confrontation. It was her chance to assert her authority. She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still perfectly audible to Bruno. Look, I don't know how you managed to get a ticket in this cabin, but here we have rules. Your bag, with its flashy color, is not an exception. Now either you put it on the floor, or I will put it there for you. The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. The casual racism was now overt, wrapped in a thin veneer of corporate policy. The jab about the flashy color was a direct shot at what Jessica perceived as Imani's new money taste, a taste she deemed inappropriate for the hallowed halls of first class. From across the aisle, Bruno felt a cold fury settle over him. He had heard enough. His book lay forgotten in his lap. He watched Imani's reaction, saw the way her hands clenched slightly, the way her jaw set. He saw her take a deep, centering breath, refusing to be baited into an unseemly argument. Fine, Imani, said her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. She gracefully lifted the bag and placed it on the floor at her feet, tucked away. She would not cause a scene. She would not become the angry black woman this flight attendant so clearly wanted her to be. She would win by refusing to play the game. Jessica Victorious gave a triumphant little sniff. She turned to the other passengers with a look that said, "See, it's all handled." She then approached Mr. Sterling's pod. "Can I get you a refill on that scotch, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her voice once again dripping with syrupy sweetness. Actually, Jessica Sterling said, his voice surprisingly loud and crisp. "I think the lady is right. My briefcase is on the seat next to me. It's larger than her handbag." He gestured to a large, well-worn leather attaché case. "Is my membership to the chairman's circle the only thing keeping it off the floor?" Jessica froze. This was not part of the script. An ally for Imani was an unexpected complication. Her professional smile wavered for a second. "Of course not, Mr. Sterling. That's different." "How so?" he pressed, genuinely curious. "It's a briefcase," Jessica stammered, searching for a logical foothold. "Hers is a purse." The absurdity of the statement silenced the cabin. The film producer let out a short, sharp laugh before stifling it. Jessica's face for the first time turned a shade of pink. She had been so focused on her target that she had failed to consider the wider audience. Before she could formulate a response, Bruno decided to add a little pressure. He raised his hand slightly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying a weight of authority that made Jessica turn instantly. It was the first time he had spoken to her. "Yes, sir?" she asked, her eyes scanning his simple clothes with a practiced air of dismissal. He was just another passenger, and one who didn't look the part at that. I was just wondering. Bruno said, his expression one of polite confusion. What is the official Stellara air policy on the personal items of spouses? Does my wife's status depend on my own, or is she assessed individually? Jessica stared at him blankly. The question was odd, almost nonsensical. Wife? She glanced from the plainly dressed man to the elegantly composed Imani. They were together. The idea seemed improbable to her, a mismatch in her carefully constructed hierarchy of the world. Your wife, she repeated, unable to hide her disbelief. Yes, Bruno said, gesturing calmly towards Imani. My wife, Imani. I'm just trying to understand the rules. You mentioned the chairman's circle. As I am also a member, I was wondering if that courtesy extends to her. Or is it nullified by her choice of handbag? The cabin went dead silent. The senator's wife put down her champagne glass. Mr. Sterling leaned forward, a slow grin spreading across his face. He knew who the members of the ultra-exclusive chairman's circle were. It was a very short list. He was on it. But he had never seen this man before. Jessica's mind was racing. Chairman's circle. This man in the Henley shirt and jeans. It was impossible. He wasn't in the system under that name. She prided herself on knowing every single one of them. He was bluffing, trying to defend his girlfriend with a clumsy, transparent lie. Her professional mask slipped firmly back into place, this time with an added layer of condescending pity. Sir, she said, her voice laced with false sweetness. I appreciate you trying to help, but there's no need to fib. I know every member of the chairman's circle, personally. If you'd like to submit a complaint on behalf of your partner, you can do so through the official channels after we land. She turned her back on him, a final act of dismissal. Bruno simply nodded to himself, a grim little smile touching his lips. He had given her an out. He had dangled the rope of the chairman's circle in front of her, and she had not only refused to grab it, she had cut it with the scissors of her own arrogance. He caught Imani's eye. She gave him a look, a subtle mix of exasperation, anger, and a flicker of amusement at his failed attempt to intervene. The look also said, "Let it go." For now. He leaned back in his seat and picked up his book, but he wasn't reading. He was composing a mental list. A list of policy failures, of training gaps, and of personnel who needed to be re-evaluated. And at the very top of that list, underlined in metaphorical red ink, was the name Jessica Davies. The pressure cooker had been sealed. It was only a matter of time before it blew. The meal service was the final act in Jessica's theatre of disrespect. While other passengers were presented with their choices on pristine white tablecloths, Imani's meal was delivered with a perfunctory thud. Jessica forgot her appetizer, and when reminded, brought it out with a sigh, long after Bruno and the others had finished theirs. Each interaction was a fresh paper cut, a small wound intended to bleed Imani's composure dry. But Imani was a fortress. She ate her meal with slow, deliberate grace, complimented the salmon, and politely requested a coffee. She had faced down hostile venture capitalists and corporate raiders. She would not be broken by a petty tyrant in a flight attendant's uniform. Her calm was its own form of defiance, a shield that Jessica's barbs could not penetrate. The catalyst for the story's climax came from an unexpected source. The film producer, a gregarious man named Ben Carter, had been surreptitiously recording the interactions on his phone after the initial argument over the bag. He wasn't a gossip columnist. He was a documentarian who had a keen sense for human drama and injustice. He recognized the narrative playing out before him, a classic story of prejudice and abuse of power. As Jessica cleared the dessert plates, she made her final fatal error. She paused by Imani's seat, ostensibly to collect her tray, but really to deliver one last parting shot. "I do hope the flight is to your satisfaction," she said, her voice dripping with mock concern. She then glanced down at the emerald bag at Imani's feet. "And I highly recommend that next time you fly with us, you invest in a more traditional piece of luggage. Something from a reputable brand. It avoids so much confusion." The insult was breathtaking in its audacity. She was not just insulting the bag, but Imani's taste, her legitimacy, her very presence in that cabin. Imani finally looked up, her eyes locking with Jessica's. The fortress walls came down not with an explosion of anger, but with a wave of ice-cold power. "This bag," she said, her voice low and dangerously quiet, was handcrafted by Elias Dubois. "His waiting list is 2 years long. It is made from a material my company Innovate developed. The same material, in fact, that Stellara Air is currently in a bidding war to license for your new Polaris line of seating." She paused, letting the information hang in the air. "This bag is worth more than your annual salary, but its real value is in the innovation it represents, something you seem incapable of recognizing." Jessica's smug expression faltered. Innovate. She'd seen that name in the corporate newsletters, the big multi-million-dollar deal to revamp the cabins, but the connection didn't fully compute. It couldn't be. This young woman. Before she could process it, Bruno decided the time for observation was over. The time for action had come. He carefully placed a bookmark in his novel, closed it, and stood up. He was not a tall man, perhaps 5'10", but he had a presence that had been deliberately muted for the past few hours. Now he let it fill the space. He walked out of his pod and stood in the aisle next to his wife. He wasn't looking at Jessica. He was looking at the cabin manager, a younger man named David, who had been hovering nervously near the galley, aware of the tension, but unwilling to challenge his senior supervisor. "David Bruno," said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the cabin's hum like a diamond. Every passenger, including those who had been feigning sleep, was now wide awake and watching. David scurried over his face, pale. "Yes, Mr. Bruno ignored the question. "Please get me the flight manifest. And a satellite phone. I need to make a call to our Chief of Operations and the Head of Human Resources." Jessica stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. The sheer arrogance of this man was astounding. "Sir, I am the cabin supervisor here. All communications go through me, and the satellite phone is for emergencies only." Bruno finally turned his gaze upon her. The affable, unassuming mask was gone. His eyes were like chips of blue ice. The look he gave her was not one of anger, but of profound disappointment and cold clinical assessment. It was the look a surgeon gives a diseased organ before excision. "Jessica," he said, and the use of her first name, so familiar yet so alien coming from him, sent a jolt down her spine. "Your tenure as cabin supervisor, and indeed your employment with Stellara Air, is the emergency I am referring to." A nervous titter came from the film producer's seat. Jessica's face blanched. I don't know who you think you are, but you can't speak to me like that. I will have you restrained and arrested when we land." Bruno simply reached into the inner pocket of his worn leather jacket. He pulled out a slim black wallet. He didn't flash it around. He opened it and showed it only to Jessica and the trembling cabin manager, David. Inside, behind a clear plastic window, was an ID card. It wasn't a driver's license or a credit card. It was a Stellara Air corporate executive card. It had a photo of his face, the same face, but younger, clean-shaven in a sharp suit. And below the photo in bold letters were the words, Bruno Croft, Chief Executive Officer. The silence in the cabin was absolute. It was as if the plane's engines had cut out. Jessica's eyes darted from the ID card to Bruno's face and back again. Her brain refused to connect the two realities. The man in the cheap Henley, the CEO, the husband of the woman she had been tormenting for hours. It was a logical impossibility, a tear in the fabric of her well-ordered universe. Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. The color drained from her face, leaving a pasty, grayish pallor. Her carefully constructed world of power and prestige, built over 2 decades, had just been demolished by a man in a leather jacket. David, the junior manager, looked like he was about to faint. He stared at Bruno with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. Bruno's voice was calm, but carried the finality of a judge's gavel. "Jessica Davies," he said, making sure to use her full name. "You have, in the course of a few hours, insulted my wife, belittled a passenger in front of her peers, misrepresented company policy to assert your own prejudice, and demonstrated a level of judgment so poor it constitutes a safety risk." He then turned to Imani, his eyes softening. "I'm sorry, my love," he said softly, for her alone to hear. "I let that go on for too long." Imani simply reached out and took his hand. Her touch both a comfort and a confirmation. Bruno then looked back at the petrified Jessica. "You are relieved of your duties for the remainder of this flight. You will confine yourself to the galley. You will not interact with any passengers or crew. David is now in charge. When we land at Heathrow, you will be met at the gate by head of security and an HR representative. Is that understood?" Jessica could only manage a weak, jerky nod. Her reign was over. Her world had ended at 30,000 feet. She stumbled back, bumping into a bulkhead, before turning and practically fleeing towards the galley. The eyes of every passenger burning into her back. The hunter had, in a stunning reversal of fortune, become the hunted. And her ordeal was only just beginning. The moment Jessica vanished into the galley, the first-class cabin erupted not in applause, but in a low, buzzing murmur of disbelief and shock. The air, once thick with tension, was now charged with the electric thrill of a dramatic denouement. The other passengers looked at Bruno and Imani with entirely new eyes. They were no longer just a mismatched couple. They were a power couple of the highest order, hiding in plain sight. David, the newly promoted and terrified cabin manager, was galvanized into action. "Mr. Croft." "Sir, I am so sorry. I had no idea. Is there anything at all I can get for you?" "For Mrs. Croft," he was practically bowing. "Just ensure the rest of the flight is comfortable for all our guests," David Bruno said, his voice level again. "And please extend my apologies to everyone in this cabin for what they've had to witness. This is not the standard of service Stellara Air aims for." "Of course, sir." "Right away, sir." David scurried off, his mind clearly blown. Mr. Sterling, the hedge fund manager, leaned out of his pod. "Croft," he said with a newfound respect. "I thought I knew all the players." "Well played. Your wife is a class act. Handled that with more grace than I would have." Imani gave a small, appreciative nod in his direction. Ben Carter, the film producer, was practically vibrating with excitement. He knew he had captured gold. This wasn't just a viral video of a Karen flight attendant. This was a corporate drama with a Hollywood twist. He discreetly stopped recording his mind, already storyboarding the sequence. Bruno sat back down, the weight of the situation settling on him. He looked at Imani, his expression a mixture of apology and exhaustion. "I should have stepped in sooner." "No," Imani said, reaching across the aisle to squeeze his hand. "You did what you had to do. You needed to see it raw, and I needed to handle it myself." But she added a wry smile playing on her lips. "I will admit your timing was impeccable." A low, muffled sob could be heard from the direction of the galley. Jessica was having a complete and total meltdown. Her 2 decades of pride seniority and carefully cultivated authority had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. Bruno sighed. "David." He called out, his voice softer now. "Check on her. Make sure she's okay. As okay as she can be. Just keep her away from the passengers." He felt no pity for Jessica, but he had a duty of care, and a public breakdown on his aircraft was a liability he didn't need. As the flight continued, a new, almost surreal sense of calm descended. The crew, under David's frantic direction, delivered a level of service that was beyond exemplary. Every request was met with lightning speed and a fearful reverence. But the real drama was unfolding silently. Bruno, true to his word, had David bring him the sat phone. He made 2 quiet calls. The first was to Clayton Rourke, his chief of operations. The conversation was brief and brutally efficient. Bruno laid out the situation, the names, the flight number. Rourke's shocked silence on the other end of the line was telling. He was ordered to have a full HR and security team meet the plane not at the public gate, but at a private hangar. The second call was to the head of his legal department. While he was on the phone, Imani opened her laptop. She pulled up the file for the deal she was flying to London to close. It was a £50 million acquisition of a British materials science company, a company that Stellara Air had also been trying to court for a partnership. When Bruno finished his calls, he looked over at her screen. "They're going to be so thrilled to see you," he said, with a weary smile. "The woman behind Innovate." Bruno Imani said, her tone suddenly serious. She turned her laptop screen towards him. On the screen was the signature page of the acquisition document. "There's something you don't know. Something I was going to tell you over dinner in London tonight." He leaned in his eyes, scanning the document. He saw the name of the company being acquired, Viridian Dynamics. And then he saw the list of their primary clients and partners. Near the top of the list was a very familiar name, Stellara Air. Viridian, he breathed the color draining slightly from his own face. "They're our sole supplier for the carbon fiber composites in the A380 fleet's fuselage. We have a 10-year exclusive contract with them," had Imani corrected gently. "You had an exclusive contract. When my acquisition is finalized tomorrow morning, Innovate will own Viridian Dynamics. Which means, my love..." She paused, letting the full weight of her next words sink in. "That as of tomorrow I will be your most critical supplier." Bruno stared at her, then at the screen, then back at her. The situation had just morphed from a serious HR incident into a potential corporate catastrophe. He wasn't just the CEO whose wife had been harassed by an employee. He was now the CEO whose most vital supplier was controlled by the very woman his airline had just profoundly insulted. The twist was staggering. Imani's power wasn't just in her own company. It was about to be woven into the very fabric of his. The emerald green bag, the symbol of Innovate's technology, was no longer just a bag. It was a harbinger. It represented the material that made up his planes and the woman who now controlled it. The bidding war for the new seat fabric. He started connecting the dots. Was the final piece of my due diligence Imani finished for him. I wanted to see how your company treated its potential partners, how it valued innovation. Your R&D department was brilliant. Your frontline staff, however, she gestured around the cabin, leaves something to be desired. Bruno leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The flight attendant's petty cruelty had opened a Pandora's box of consequences he could never have imagined. This was no longer just about firing one employee. This was about saving the relationship with the single most important supplier to his entire long-haul fleet. The fate of Stellara Air's future was no longer just in his hands as CEO. It was also resting in the hands of his wife, the woman his airline had deemed unworthy of a coaster for her drink. The karma wasn't just coming for Jessica. It was circling the entire company. The landing at Heathrow was unlike any other. Instead of taxiing to the bustling Terminal 5, the A380 was discreetly guided to the remote executive section of the airport, a sterile area of private hangars and black cars with tinted windows. The moment the engine spooled down, the cabin door was opened not by ground staff, but by two grim-faced men in dark suits. They were Clayton Rourke, the COO, and the head of UK security. They boarded the plane, their eyes immediately finding Bruno. Rourke, a man known for his unflappable demeanor, looked visibly shaken. "Bruno," he murmured, "I am speechless. And this is Mrs. Croft. Ma'am, on behalf of everyone at Stellara, I am profoundly sorry." Imani accepted his apology with a gracious nod, but her expression remained unreadable, which was far more terrifying to Rourke than any outburst would have been. Jessica Davies was escorted off the plane first. She was a ghost of her former self. Her severe bun had come loose, her makeup was streaked with tears, and the arrogant glint in her eyes had been replaced by a hollow, vacant stare of pure dread. She didn't look at Bruno or Imani as she was led away by an HR manager towards a waiting car. Her 2-decade career had ended in the quiet ignominy of a private hangar. As Bruno and Imani deplaned Ben Carter, the film producer approached them hesitantly. "Mr. Croft." "Mrs. Croft," he began, holding his phone. I recorded most of what happened. The argument over the bag, the comments, all of it." Bruno looked at the man. "And what do you intend to do with that recording, Mr. Carter?" "Ordinarily, I'd know the answer to that," Carter said honestly. "This is a hell of a story, but seeing as it involves, well, everything, I wanted to ask you first." Imani spoke before Bruno could. "Release it," she said, her voice clear and firm. Both men looked at her surprised. "My love," Bruno questioned, concerned about the potential PR storm. "Release it," Imani repeated. "I'm not ashamed of what happened. Jessica's behavior thrives in the dark. It survives because people are conditioned to stay quiet, to not make a scene. Let people see what happened. Let them hear it. The world needs to see that this kind of casual bigotry isn't just rude, it has real consequences." She then looked directly at Carter. "Don't edit it to make me look like a helpless victim. Show my response. Show all of it. The truth is more powerful than any curated narrative." Carter, a man who dealt in stories, recognized the power in hers. He nodded. "I will. I'll post it tonight." By the time Bruno and Imani had settled into their suite at the Corinthia, the video was live. Carter had posted it to his verified Twitter account with a simple caption, This happened on my Stellara Air flight to London today. A masterclass in how not to treat a passenger. Stick around for the plot twist at the end. Stellara Air. Flying. While black. The internet did the rest. At first it was a slow burn. A few hundred retweets. Then it was picked up by a major travel blogger. Then a celebrity activist shared it. By morning in New York, it was the #1 trending topic in the world. The hashtags Stellara Air and Jessica the flight attendant were everywhere. The video was a perfect storm of viral content. It had a clear villain in Jessica, whose sneering condescension was viscerally hateable. It had a sympathetic and poised protagonist in Imani, and it had the jaw-dropping plot twist of Bruno's identity reveal. The internet collectively gasped when the quiet man in the Henley shirt identified himself as the CEO. But what truly propelled it into the stratosphere was Imani's identity. Within hours, journalists had connected Imani Williams to Imani Williams, CEO of Innovate. The story changed. It wasn't just flight attendant Mock's woman's bag. It became flight attendant Mock's tech CEO's bag, unaware her husband is the airline's CEO. The narrative was irresistible. The comment sections were a wildfire. That flight attendant's face when he pulled out the ID priceless. Imani handled that with so much class. I would have been screaming. I'm a black woman in STEM, and I felt this in my soul. The constant need to prove you belong. Stellara Air better be preparing the world's biggest apology. Then the second layer of karma began to unfold, thanks to Imani's earlier revelation. A financial journalist with a massive following tweeted, "The hashtag Stellara Air drama gets deeper." Sources confirm Imani Williams' company. Innovate is in the final stages of acquiring Viridian Dynamics, Stellara's sole supplier for A380 fuselage composites. The woman they insulted now literally helps hold their planes together. That tweet was like pouring gasoline on the fire. It hit Bloomberg, Reuters, and the Wall Street Journal within the hour. The story leaped from social media gossip to a serious financial news story. When the market opened, Stellara Air's stock ticker, TLA, plummeted. It dropped 8% in the first hour of trading, wiping out over $400 million in market capitalization. The hard karma was no longer just about Jessica Davies losing her job. It was now a multi-million-dollar corporate crisis. The airline's carefully crafted image of premium inclusive service was in ashes. Their brand was being defined in real time by the sneer on one employee's face and the systemic prejudice it represented. In the hotel suite, Bruno watched the news on his tablet, his face grim. The numbers on the stock ticker were a brutal, unforgiving scoreboard. Every tick down was a testament to the rot he had failed to excise from his own company. Imani came and sat beside him, placing her hand on his arm. She wasn't gloating. She was watching the consequences of her decision to let Carter release the video play out. "This is bigger than Jessica now," Bruno said, his voice heavy. "This is about the entire culture of the company. The board is calling for an emergency meeting. They're demanding a public response." "What are you going to tell them?" Imani asked. Bruno looked at the stock chart, then at his wife. He saw the woman he loved who had been needlessly humiliated. He saw the brilliant CEO who now held a significant portion of his company's fate in her hands. "The truth," Bruno said, a new resolve hardening his voice. "I'm going to tell them that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a disease, and that the only cure is radical surgery." The public fallout was a raging inferno, but the real test was yet to come. It would happen behind the closed doors of the Stellara Air boardroom, where Bruno would have to fight for the soul of his company against a board that cared more about share prices than social justice. And his biggest ally and his biggest threat was the woman sitting right next to him. The 24 hours that followed the video's viral explosion were a blur of crisis management and cascading consequences. For Jessica Davies, the unraveling was swift and brutal. She was not just fired. Stellara Air, in a desperate attempt to show decisive action, terminated her contract for cause, citing gross misconduct and violations of the company's code of conduct. This meant she received no severance package, no payout for her thousands of accrued flight hours, and her pension was frozen pending a review. The company that had been her entire professional identity for over 2 decades cast her out with the clinical efficiency of a body rejecting a foreign implant. Her personal details, including her full name and general location, were leaked by online sleuths within hours. Her social media accounts were inundated with a tidal wave of vitriol. She was forced to delete them, but the damage was done. News vans camped outside her suburban London home. She became a prisoner in her own house, the target of a global shaming campaign. Friends distanced themselves. Colleagues from the airline, fearing association with her, stopped answering her calls. The union, while making a token statement about due process, privately informed her that her case was indefensible. The video was too clear, the power dynamics too stark. Defending her would be career suicide for any union representative. Jessica Davies, the former gatekeeper of the skies, was now a pariah. Her world had not just shrunk, it had collapsed into a black hole of her own making. For Stellara Air, the unraveling was more complex, but just as painful. The emergency board meeting was a bloodbath. Lord Harrington, a cantankerous and influential board member, led the charge against Bruno. $400 million, Croft, he boomed over the video conference call. That's the price tag for your wife's hurt feelings. You should have buried this, not let it become a global spectacle. This stopped being about my wife's feelings the moment Jessica Davies decided to make prejudice her co-pilot. Bruno retorted, his voice steely. This is about a systemic failure. We have diversity and inclusion posters in every crew lounge, but some of our senior staff still think it's acceptable to treat a black passenger like a second-class citizen. The market isn't reacting to a video, it's reacting to the discovery that our brand promise is a lie. So what's your grand solution? Another board member sneered. Mandatory sensitivity training and a press release full of empty platitudes. No, Bruno said. My solution is a complete top-down cultural overhaul. I'm commissioning an independent external audit of our hiring, training, and promotion practices with a specific focus on identifying and eliminating implicit bias. I'm tying all senior executive bonuses directly to measurable improvements in diversity and customer satisfaction scores across all demographics. And I'm creating a new C-suite position, a Chief Culture and Inclusion Officer, who will report directly to me. The board was stunned into silence. This was not damage control. This was a revolution. And the cost, Lord Harrington sputtered. An external audit of that scale will cost millions. A new C-suite officer. More overhead. It will cost less than the $800 million we'll lose if we let this fester and innovate, decides we're too toxic a partner to do business with. Bruno shot back, playing his trump card. Imani Williams now controls our most critical supply chain. Do you really want to go into that negotiation with a C-suite that thinks this was just a PR blunder? That silenced the dissent. The fear of losing the Viridian Dynamics contract was more potent than any anger over the stock price. Bruno had their reluctant approval. The final piece of the immediate fallout was Imani's move. The next morning, her legal team finalized the acquisition of Viridian Dynamics. The announcement was sent to the press, not by Viridian, but by Innovate. The release was a masterpiece of corporate strategy. It celebrated the acquisition and the synergy between the two companies. It then included a single, devastatingly elegant paragraph. Innovate is built on a foundation of progress, respect, and forward thinking. We believe in partners who share these core values. We are confident that the leadership at Stellara Air understands the importance of this alignment and will take the necessary steps to ensure their corporate culture reflects the standards we require from all our key collaborators. It was a public warning shot, a declaration that Imani was not just a supplier. She was now a partner who would hold them accountable. The market understood the message perfectly. Stellara's stock stabilized, but it did not recover. It was now in a holding pattern, waiting to see if the airline could truly change. That evening, in the quiet of their hotel suite, away from the frantic calls and news alerts, Bruno looked at Imani. The past 2 days had aged him, but there was a new clarity in his eyes. "You could have destroyed the company," he said, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. "You could have terminated the Viridian contract, cited a values mismatch, and sent us into a tailspin." "I could have," she agreed, sipping her tea. "But a world where Stellara Air fails doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the thousands of good employees who do their jobs with respect every day. It doesn't help the passengers who rely on you. And it doesn't help my new acquisition, which needs you as a client." She put down her cup and looked him in the eye. "I don't want to destroy your company, Bruno. I want you to fix it. I want to be a partner to a company that's as innovative in its culture as it is in its choice of seat fabric." Her power was not the brutish force of a corporate raider. It was the precise strategic power of a builder. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was demanding reform. And she had maneuvered herself into a position where she could not be ignored. The hard karma that had hit Jessica Davies was personal and destructive. The karma hitting Stellara Air was transformative. It was a painful, expensive, and deeply public reckoning that would force the airline to either evolve or die. Bruno Croft, the CEO, now had his mandate given to him by the two forces he could not deny: the market and his wife. The unraveling was over. The rebuilding was about to begin. 3 months later, the dust had settled, but the landscape had been permanently altered. The Stellara Air incident, as it came to be known, had become a business school case study in modern corporate karma. Jessica Davies had sold her house and moved to a small anonymous town. Unable to find work in the aviation industry, an industry that prides itself on customer service and has a very long memory, she took a job as a clerk in a shipping warehouse working the night shift. Her fall from the heights of first-class service to the anonymity of a warehouse floor was absolute. The final cruel twist of her fate came when she saw a shipment of new flight attendant uniforms arriving for Stellara Air uniforms, made with an innovative, comfortable stretch fabric supplied by Innovate. She was now, in a way, packaging the symbols of the very company and culture that had replaced her. That was her hard karma. Not a single dramatic event, but a quiet daily reminder of what she had lost through her own prejudice. At Stellara Air, Bruno's radical surgery was in full effect. The external audit had been brutal, uncovering pockets of ingrained bias and outdated old boys club practices, particularly in the promotion of senior cabin crew. Lord Harrington, after a vote of no confidence initiated by Bruno, was quietly removed from the board. The new Chief Culture and Inclusion Officer, a highly respected former civil rights lawyer named Dr. Anya Sharma, was wielding her power with precision, implementing new training programs that were light on corporate jargon and heavy on real-world scenarios. The most visible change was the Imani initiative. In their new contract negotiations, Imani had insisted on a clause that tied a portion of Innovate's supply cost to Stellara's performance on diversity metrics. If Stellara hit its targets for hiring and promoting women and people of color, they would get a discount on the materials from Innovate. If they missed them, they paid a premium. It was a revolutionary concept, a supplier contractually incentivizing the social progress of its client. Bruno and Imani's relationship had also reached a new altitude. The incident had stripped away the last vestiges of separation between their professional and personal lives, merging them into a formidable partnership. They were seen as the ultimate power couple, not just for their wealth, but for their shared vision. The final twist in the saga came during the press conference announcing the renewed multi-year partnership between Stellara Air and Innovate. Bruno and Imani stood side by side at the podium. After announcing the details of the contract and the innovative Imani initiative, a reporter asked a pointed question. Mr. Croft, some critics say these changes are just an elaborate and expensive apology to your wife. How do you respond to that? Bruno smiled. Stellara Air doesn't owe my wife an apology. It owes her a debt of gratitude. He then turned the microphone over to Imani. Imani looked out at the sea of reporters, her presence commanding the room. What happened on Flight 72 was not an attack on me personally, she said, her voice resonating with clarity and strength. It was a failure of a system that my husband is now working tirelessly to fix. But the motivation for this change isn't guilt. It's good business. She leaned forward slightly. The bag that started all of this was a symbol of innovation. The person carrying it was a symbol of a changing world of leadership. The flight attendant who mocked it was a symbol of an old guard resistant to change. A company that cannot tell the difference between those three things is a company that is flying blind. She paused, letting her final words land with maximum impact. Innovate and Stellara Air are now partners because we believe in a future where the value of something and someone is not determined by its traditional appearance, but by the power of the ideas it contains. We aren't just building better airplanes, we're building a better way to do business. Thank you. The room erupted in applause. It was a masterclass in turning a crisis into a defining mission. The story was no longer about a flight attendant and a bag. It was about a new corporate philosophy. Bruno had saved his company not by burying a scandal, but by embracing the painful truth it revealed. And Imani had used her power not for retribution, but for revolution. Together they had navigated the turbulence and found a new, higher cruising altitude, proving that the most powerful karma isn't just about punishment. It's about profound, lasting, and meaningful change. And there you have it. A story that started with a sneer over a handbag and ended with the complete restructuring of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. It's a shocking reminder that the people you meet on any given day might hold more power than you can possibly imagine. Jessica Davies learned that lesson the hard way, losing everything because she chose prejudice over professionalism. But the real lesson here is about the two types of power: the fleeting power of a title like Jessica's and the real lasting power of innovation and integrity embodied by Imani and Bruno. This wasn't just karma, it was a corporate cleansing. What do you think? Was the outcome fair? Who was the most powerful person in this story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories where arrogance meets its match, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more real-life drama.